What's up guys, Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice coming at you with a brand new video on the players on new teams. That's right, free agency is over, the season is looming, and now it's time to analyze these new players in new situations and what that means for them for fantasy. Before we jump into it though, just have to let you guys know the Facebook group is full, so if you guys do send a request, you will not be able to join. We are at capacity. Moving forward, only premium members are going to be able to join. If you'd like to take a look at our premium benefits, go to the website thefantasyfootballadvice.com, join in and secure your spot in this Facebook group and have access to all the benefits that premium members get. That's enough about that. Let's jump into this video. So the first player I have to talk about is Alshon Jeffery. Now he's coming into his 6th season in the league and he's really entering his prime at 27 years old. One scary factor about him is he always seems to have these soft tissue injuries. He's only played a full 16 games twice. It's pretty alarming. Every season I always hear it, hamstring, hamstring, hamstring. If you ask me, it's really his commitment to staying on the field is really what holds him back over anything else. I think if he sees steady involvement in this offense, I think these soft tissue injuries won't bother him. Because again, I think it's more of a commitment to staying on the field more than anything. Now ESPN has Jeffery at wide receiver 12, so he is technically a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 in that range. We don't have him that far off of that. We have him at about wide receiver 18, which makes him a mid-round wide receiver 2. Nobody can argue that he doesn't have the talent to be a top 8 wide receiver in this league. It's just been a while since we've seen it. His best year was playing second fiddle to Brandon Marshall, and we're years removed from that. One thing he does have going for him is that he's on a 1-year deal, basically a prove-it deal. When a player bets on himself by accepting a 1-year deal, it normally means that they want to produce to get that big payday. One big question mark standing in that way is the second-year quarterback Carson Wentz. He had a decent rookie year, I'll give him that, but he hasn't yet shown us he can play well enough to support weekly wide receiver 1 production. On the bright side, Wentz will have Lane Johnson back, who was suspended 10 games last season. The Eagles with Lane Johnson in the roster was 5-1, and when he was off the field, they went 2-8 without him. Now believe me, I'm in no way biased. I'm an Eagles fan myself, and I can't say that I will be targeting Jeffery unless I see that connection during preseason. Coming in at wide receiver 12, his price is just a little too hefty for the injury risk and unknown connection. Another factor is we just simply like other wide receivers that are being drafted around him. Players like Demaryius Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, and Doug Baldwin are all examples of players we would take ahead of him. Okay, so next up is a player that has a lot of buzz around him, Brandon Cooks, incoming to the Patriots, coming from the Saints. This is actually a lot less of a change than you would think. He's not necessarily getting an upgrade or a downgrade at the quarterback position going from Brees to Brady. I guess if you wanted, you could argue his production will be less because the Saints were coming from behind in a lot of games and have to throw more to stay competitive. But the thing is, the Patriots never stop throwing the ball, even if they're up by 20 points. Nothing is going to change. He will be boom or bust week to week. That's going to be the same no matter which team he's on. Now, one thing he has going against him coming on this team is that he was very vocal last year when he wasn't receiving the targets he wanted. And as we know, Bill Belichick has been known to have game plans where the best players are just not part of the plan. That could happen any given week, and if Brandon Cooks doesn't watch himself, he can be finding the bench really quickly. Now, I do believe Cooks will understand the culture and won't be so quick to speak up if he doesn't get the ball. Thing is, I just really don't think Cooks will be able to have consistent wide receiver 1 numbers, even on the Patriots. They simply have too many weapons to support that type of production on one receiver. Now, one thing that Cooks does have going for him is he does come in at a decent value, currently at wide receiver 14 in ESPN. Now, you are getting somewhat of a discount considering that he did finish last season as wide receiver 10. The thing is, he will be hard pressed to reach that. We still have faith in Cooks. There are rosters that are built for him. We talked about balancing safe floor guys with high upside guys. Brandon Cooks, definitely a high upside guy. We currently have him ranked as wide receiver 15. You're going to get weeks where he's going 3 for 30, and you're also going to get weeks where he's going 7 for 160 and a pair of touchdowns. So coming in next is Eddie Lacy, and we all know about his weight issues, so there's no point in me beating a dead horse right now. But I will say one thing, if you look at the photos from training camp, he actually looks good. Comparatively speaking, of course. He's no Le'Veon Bell or Derrick Henry, but compared to what he looked like before, he's putting in the work. I definitely think a change of scenery is good for a player who had a lot of baggage. No pun intended, but he really did have a lot of media attention in the negative way. And now he comes into the Seahawks, who are actually a top-tier team for running the ball. They get a bad rap from last year, but if you exclude last year, in the rushing yardage department, they've come in first, third, 4th, and 3rd the 4 previous years before that. Now, we definitely know that has a lot to do with Russell Wilson joining the Seahawks at the quarterback position, but it's no secret that the Seahawks are a defensive-minded team that are known to pound the rock. In that same 4-year sample size, they were in the top 4 in the percentage of rushing plays versus passing plays. That includes 2 number 1 finishes. They got a little off track this past year, but believe me, they're going back to the basics for 2017. Let's be honest though, the offensive line has been absolutely abysmal since trading Max Unger, but it's hard to imagine them being any worse at the position coming into 2017. And don't you worry about Thomas Rawls taking carries away. They wouldn't be paying Eddie Lacy $5.5 million, which makes him a top 10 paid player at the position on what is to be a 1-year prove-it deal. Thomas Rawls is simply just not going to be a factor. So where does this come into his fantasy value? Well, for a player who is a virtual lock to get the first and second down work, and he's coming in at RB23, there is some room for him to exceed some value. Don't draft him as anything more than an RB3. That way, at the start of the season, you don't feel required to start him. It also leaves some room for upside in standard leagues. I wouldn't touch him in PPR unless he really fell, because we fully expect Pro Size to be that pass-catching specialist. Now, some players who are going right behind him are CJ Anderson, Frank Gore. I think it's pretty clear that there's a significant drop-off from there. If you want to get Eddie Lacy, this may be the year to see some value from him. Just don't expect him to have these game-breaking games behind this offensive line. Next, we have one of the channel's favorite players coming into the 2017 season. That's Terrelle Pryor, coming from the Browns to the Washington Redskins. There's not much to say that we haven't already said, and we haven't been shy to voice our love for this player. Now, one thing about Pryor is he's actually a good play in both standard and PPR. That's pretty rare for a player. It's really tough to determine how much of a value you're getting on him. It still is a consensus that he is a steal, but his ADP has literally been all over the place. It's hard for us to really pinpoint where he stands, so we can tell you guys either if you should reach for him or if he's overvalued or undervalued. It just puts us in a tough spot right now, so we'll be continuing to follow up on that throughout the offseason. Bottom line though, we think he will be a 4th round pick, and that is a very fair value for this caliber of player. A 4th round pick essentially makes him a wide receiver 2. That's what he finished last year, coming in at wide receiver 20 with McCown, Kessler, and RG3 at the helm. Now that's just a giant mess. Now he has Kirk Cousins throwing him the ball, who, if you ask me, that guy is the real deal. He threw for the 3rd most yards in the entire league and was 83 yards shy from hitting that 5K mark. Fun fact about that, only 5 quarterbacks in NFL history have accomplished that task. And I don't think it's a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when Kirk Cousins will hit that 5,000 yard mark. He's only 28 years old. To have a finish like he did with only throwing 25 touchdowns is just insane. His touchdown numbers were definitely on the low side, but we expect him to bounce back from that this year. Pryor should definitely help him in that department. He's 6'4". He will be the tallest receiver in this offense. There will definitely be plays drawn up where he is the first read in the red zone. I truly believe that he will finish the season as the most targeted receiver in this offense, so if you grab him as your wide receiver 2, don't look back. If his ADP doesn't climb by draft day, try to wait and grab him even a round later. Moving on, we have Pierre Garcon coming from the Washington Redskins, moving over to the 49ers. Garcon, man, this guy has had his days. He's done pretty well in his career, but he's going to be 31 years old. One important factor that you need to decide is your scoring system. If you're in PPR, you can consider Garcon, but if you're in standard, don't touch this guy. Don't even consider it. His draft price is really climbing. I think his stock continues to rise. The more articles that get pumped out saying Garcon's looking good, the Kyle Shanahan reconnection, his draft price is just starting to scare us away. The good news is that he's on the 49ers and their defense sucks. They will be throwing a lot just to stay competitive in these games. The bad news is Garcon is really just a wide receiver 2 for a team, and now he's being forced into the wide receiver 1 role. To be fair, the last time he did, he went for over 1,300 yards, so that's the kind of upside you could expect potentially. The only difference is, like I said earlier, he was 26 then, he's 31 now. Everyone likes to bring up the connection that, Kyle Shanahan's the new head coach of the 49ers, and he was his offensive coordinator in Washington when he had that monster season. And there is something to be made that Shanahan targeted Garcon in free agency. You think if they could have wrapped up a better receiver if they wouldn't have? No, they definitely would have. You're talking about a player who's 31 years old, who did it before 5 years ago. The connection just can't quite be made this year. If you want to put your fantasy season on the line getting this guy in like the 6th round, that's where he's being drafted at right now, then be my guest. Don't touch him in standard. In PPR, he's a high floor target, but the guys that are going around him just seem like much safer picks. Compare him to Stephon Diggs or Willie Snead. Those are the guys that are coming off the board right in the same area as Garcon, and for that reason, we will not be having many shares of Garcon in any of our leagues. The next player on this list is Marshawn Lynch, coming to the Oakland Raiders from retirement. That's right, he's not coming back from any team. He is coming straight from retirement to play for this team. To be honest, I'm pretty excited to see this matchup. The real question though is if he is in football shape. I've been seeing the training camp footage and he does look good, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. They aren't working out in pads or in full contact, so just take it for what it is. You do have to tell yourself though that if Latavius Murray can get 12 touchdowns, that's just the kind of upside that you should be able to expect from Lynch. One thing you can guarantee is that there will be a 40-60 target share coming from the backfield. Lynch will get the 40% in that transaction. That should net him around 30 plus targets for 2017. And as we know, Lynch has been known to have safe hands with the Seahawks. He's even lined up as a receiver for them in the past. I could see that being part of his repertoire moving forward for the Raiders. But what's most interesting is Lynch's contract incentives. So hear me out. Over 45% of his entire contract comes in the form of incentives. So just to break down a few, starting at 400 rushing yards, he gets $400,000. Every 100 rushing yards after that, he gets an additional $400,000. Up until he reaches 800 yards, where he gets $600,000 on top of that. So you can see how these funds just start to compile and compile and compile. His base salary is not that large. So moving forward than that, he gets another $600 if he reaches 1K yards, and for every 100 on top of that, he gets an additional $250K. Basically, if he wants to earn his paycheck, he's going to have to run the ball. And he's going to have to see the field as well, because every game he is on the active roster, he will get $31,250. There are other bonuses for, MVP honors, playoff appearances, Super Bowl appearances, etc. One thing is clear though, he has all the financial motivation he needs to stay on the field and produce at a high level. Now, one could take this information and flip it the other way, play devil's advocate so to speak, and say they could use this as a way to limit his workload. It's a way to potentially avoid paying some of this money. There's an acronym that is called NLTBE. That stands for not likely to be earned. So basically what that's saying is if they're unlikely to get this incentive, they can mark it as NLTBE. And anything that's classified as that makes it so the price does not count against the salary cap until after the season is over. Now, what makes this a little weird is that all of his rushing yardage incentives are classified as NLTBE, which could be concerning because you're basically saying that the 400 yards rushing is not likely to be earned. That just doesn't make sense. Now, this could be a little above my head. This could just be a business savvy way to save some cap space, but it kind of makes you wonder if down the stretch they're going to limit him and his workload to save some dollars. I mean, if you do think about it, they do have some big names to pay soon, more specifically Amari Cooper. One thing is for sure though, Lynch is definitely moving up draft boards. Last time I saw him on ESPN, he was RB10. Starting to get a little out of control. He is really beginning to be priced out for my liking, but if he falls to me, I'll take him in both PPR and standard as an RB2. Next player up is Jeremy Maclin, who has now left the Kansas City Chiefs and has moved over to the Baltimore Ravens. One thing that has been made very clear is that Maclin is going to get most of his reps from the slot coming into 2017. Wallace and Perriman are much better suited to play from outside. That's not to say Maclin can't. He's really good on the outside as well, but his slot numbers really speak for themselves. In Kansas City, nearly 50% of Maclin's snaps were from the slot in 2015. That was the year he had his best season, with over 1,000 yards, and his production from the slot contributed to 27 receptions and 6 touchdowns. One thing that you may not know is that Maclin in total has had 12 touchdowns from the slot since 2014, which is actually good for 4th in the entire league through that span. That's even including his horrible excuse for a year he had in 2016. Now he's moving over to the Ravens, and the best season a Ravens slot receiver has had in terms of yards per route run was in 2016 by Steve Smith, who had 1.81 yards per route run. Maclin has outperformed that in 3 of his past 4 seasons he has played. What does that say? That means Maclin is extremely underrated in that position. The Ravens clearly will look for Maclin on intermediate routes and will sprinkle in shots down the field with him as well. Unlike Wallace, Maclin is much more dynamic. He will be the most targeted receiver this year. One other thing to keep in mind is that the Ravens have the highest pass rush split in the entire NFL, coming in at 65% of all plays are passing plays. A large chunk of that clearly will go to the backfield with Woodhead and Dixon, but there's definitely room for Maclin to exceed his draft value. Unfortunately, it's a little too early to analyze his ADP, so we can't really tell you if he's a good value based on his ADP as of yet, but I will tell you for sure that I've already downgraded Wallace from my previously way too high ranking down to a more modest wide receiver 3. Since Maclin is coming off of a subpar year, I expect Maclin to be in that area, but he definitely has more upside in PPR than Wallace. We will update you on his value as the ADPs develop well before draft day. Our last player to speak on in this edition is Eric Decker. He now leaves the Jets to come over to Tennessee, and there's a lot to like about this move. So how has Decker been in the league? Well, excluding last year, Decker has actually averaged a fantastic 1,085 yards and 10 touchdowns the previous 4 years. You have to assume Decker is super stoked to join a young up-and-coming quarterback like Marcus Mariota. Let's get real, anything is gotta be an upgrade from that QB nightmare he had with the Jets. Fortunate for him, he was on injured reserve during half of that mess last year. I'm sure it was painful to watch from the sidelines, that's for sure. So the Titans, they have him on a 1-year deal, but they're really still trying to figure out how this receiving core will pan out for the future. They're very young at the position. You have Tajay Sharp drafted last year, Corey Davis drafted this year to be the future, and then you have Rashard Matthews, who really put in his own last season. If you ask me, some veteran leadership from Decker could be exactly what this team needs. Don't fool yourself though. Mariota had an outlier of a season when it came to efficiency in the red zone, and while we do expect some regression in his efficiency, you can't really discredit him all the way, because if you have forgotten already, he was one of the best quarterbacks at taking care of the football since his playing days in Oregon. His senior year, he threw for 42 touchdowns on only 4 interceptions through 13 games. Now that regression should be negated in part from Eric Decker. He is a stud in the red zone. He's been one of the most consistent players on the opposing team's 20-yard line for the last half decade. Now, as much as I'm talking him up, you really don't want to draft him as more than a wide receiver 3, because you can't forget this is a run-first offense. Tennessee runs the 3rd least passing plays in the entire league. Then you have to ask yourself, everyone's drafting Corey Davis, Rashard Matthews, and now Eric Decker. Is there really enough yardage to go around, especially considering Henry and Murray both have good hands too? If Decker doesn't get 1,000 yards, which is a strong likelihood, you are really only banking on the touchdowns. Now the touchdown upside is there. That's one thing Decker has been great at, and it does make him a stronger play in standard scoring systems, but if you ask us, Decker would only be a good pick in about round 7 or 8 or later. That's going to do it for this video on the players who are changing teams. Don't sweat it. If I missed a player who's joining your team, we will make sure to get to them in the second installment. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure to hit that subscribe button, toss this video a like, and we will catch you on the next one.